7 years ago, I made a video showing how it's government, not businesses, that are racist. I thought it would be a good idea to revisit this issue with updated statistics and see what, if anything, has changed. In the interim, despite the evidence I showed in this video, regressive leftists are still desperate to paint libertarians as racist, because they still can't defend their bogus arguments against the free market. They call libertarians racists solely because we have the audacity to point out that the systemic racism in this country is traceable to government activity and not the free market. In reality, their claims and their positions betray their own hideous bigotry. Once again, we will look at the disparity between African Americans in the workplace and African Americans in government. First, let's look at what those horrible, evil businesses are doing, because don't you know they look for any excuse to hate black people and make them sit at the back of the bus? Those laws mandating it were just a coincidence, you know. And let's please ignore the fact that the progressives are the ones who passed those laws to begin with. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, blacks make up 12.4% of the civilian non-institutional population and make up 12.1% of the civilian labor force, a difference well within statistical noise. Also, their labor force participation is 61.2%, well close to the overall figure of 62.9%. In fact, all races hovered around this figure and none very significantly. And their figure has matched the overall figure very well over the last 45 years. Now, the BLS did find racial disparity in the kind of work being done. Although there was little difference between the races in production jobs as well as sales and office jobs, blacks were less likely to work in construction and maintenance as well as management and professional jobs, and much more likely to take service jobs. However, this disparity matches the disparity in educational attainment and so is linked to educational outcomes, not racism in the businesses hiring them. All other disparities shown in the report, such as disparity in earnings, are linked to this as well. Of course, there's always an alternative to being hired, creating your own business. And according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the number of black-owned businesses increased at triple the national rate in the years leading up to the Great Recession. I couldn't find statistics on how well black-run businesses have done since then, since most of these were small businesses, and small businesses took a pounding as a result of the bailouts and financial regulations that occurred in its wake. I'm guessing they didn't do well for that reason if no other, but I don't actually know. So blacks have always done fairly well in the workforce compared to whites, once other factors are considered. But wait, that's because of our precious government, right? After all, they're the ones that aren't racist, and they use their special magical superpowers to make these companies hire African Americans, right? Well, let's see how government stacks up. African Americans are 13.2% of the overall population. How many African American governors are there? None. Zero. Zilch. Nada. Last time I made this comparison, there were 2. And there's only one African-American lieutenant governor, Boyd Rutherford of Maryland. But hey, I'm sure it's better when you get to state legislators, right? Wrong! Only 9% of state legislators are African-American. Wait, I know what's going on here. It's those racist southern states, right? You know, the ones that seceded and sent hundreds of thousands of their young men to die for slavery when less than 15% of the population owned even a single slave. After all, we're all a bunch of racists down here, ain't we? Yeah, it's gotta be those former Confederate states dragging down the average, right? Turns out, 18% of state legislators in southern states are black. But wait, the South has a greater population of African Americans, right? Correct. What's the population of African Americans in southern states? 18.5%. This is the only statistic I found where African Americans were anywhere close to being proportionately represented in government, and it's only 0.5% off, well within statistical noise. That means that the rest of the country has abysmally low representation of African Americans. Come on, rest of the country, try and keep up. Well, that's just state governments. The federal government's good though, right? Those are the ones we trust with all of this. They've gotta be good, right? Think again. The 114th Congress, the most diverse Congress ever, is only 8.6% black. And overall, non-whites were only 17% of Congress, when they're 38% of the population. And Asians, who are dramatically overrepresented in statistics like higher education and management jobs, are only 2% of Congress members. And how many African American senators are there? 2. Yes, a measly 2% of U.S. senators are black. Tim Scott of South Carolina and Cory Booker of New Jersey. And overall, there are just 6 senators who are a racial or ethnic minority of any kind. Think of how hard it is to win in a primary against entrenched Democratic and Republican candidates. Now look at how hard it is for someone to run as a third-party candidate and get anything resembling a fair chance. The truth is, both the Democrats and Republicans are running a good old boy network, and for the most part, African Americans are not invited, just pandered to, and you can't balance all of that out with a black president. It seems like everywhere we look in government there's systemic racism. Over their lifetimes, 5.9% of Caucasian males will go to prison. What's the percentage for African American males? 33%. That's not just because of socioeconomic factors. African Americans prosecuted for drug charges are 20% more likely to go to prison than their Caucasian counterparts. Despite the fact that only 32% of crack cocaine users are African Americans, the total percentage of those convicted of crack cocaine charges who are African American is 79.8%, and that's been the case for more than 25 years. And that's not to mention tons of other available statistics about the mistreatment of African Americans and other minorities in our justice system, from racial disparities in the death penalty all the way down to traffic tickets. The fact is, from day one, so-called progressives had a policy of eugenics, the marginalization and eventual extermination of undesirable ethnic groups. The overpopulation alarm, which still continues today, was nothing but an excuse to keep undesirable races out of the country, as was always the case with immigration restrictions. In 1921, economist Irving Fisher, still well regarded by the regressive left, wrote, "If we could leave out of account the question of race in eugenics, I should, as an economist, be inclined to the view that unrestricted immigration, although injurious to some classes, is economically advantageous to a country as a whole, and still more to the world as a whole. But such a view would ignore the supremely important factors. It would be a step backwards, a step towards populating the earth with defectives, delinquents, and dependents." Edward A. Ross, founder of the American Economic Association, called this race suicide, and Teddy Roosevelt called it the greatest problem of civilization. Another part of the eugenics plot of the so-called progressives was the minimum wage. See, they always knew that minimum wages caused job losses for those at the lowest rungs of the ladder. That was never in doubt. In fact, it was the whole point. Sidney Webb, one of the earliest members of the Fabian Society and chair of the UK's Labour Party, said in 1912, "Of all ways of dealing with these unfortunate parasites, the most ruinous to the community is to allow them to unrestrainedly compete as wage earners." As the New Republic published in 1916, "Imbecility breeds imbecility as certainly as white hens breed white chickens, and under laissez-faire, imbecility is given full chance to breed, and does so, in fact, at a rate far superior to that of able stocks." They knew that free markets led to equality among the races, and that was the last thing they wanted. The first minimum wage law in the U.S. was in Massachusetts in 1912 and specifically targeted social dependents in order to remove them from the labor force. Social dependents meant children, but the law specifically included women in that category. The first national minimum wage law was the Davis-Bacon Act. Although progressive revisionists claimed that this was a response to the Great Depression, the act was first introduced in 1927, and its specific and stated goal was to keep black workers from getting government contracts. Woodrow Wilson's Commissioner of Labor, Royal Meeker, said, "It is much better to enact a minimum wage law, even if it deprives these unfortunates of work. Better that the state should support the inefficient wholly and prevent the multiplication of the breed than subsidize incompetence and unthrift, enabling them to bring forth more of their kind. Prominent progressive economist Frank Taussig said in his Principles of Economics, "We have not reached the stage where we can proceed to chloroform them once and for all, but at least they can be segregated, shut up in refuges and asylums, and prevented from propagating their kind." And there are many other such policies that were steeped in eugenics, including the progressive income tax, occupational licensing, antitrust legislation, the corporatization of labor unions, and even welfare. Even just general business regulation, vociferously and dogmatically insisted upon by regressives, hurts African American businesses, which, as I said before, are mostly small businesses because all small businesses are hurt by regulations and cronyism. These and other progressive policies were specifically designed as their stated goal to undermine the survival prospects of undesirable races and ethnicities. Eugenics fell out of favor after World War II, but the regressives have not changed their policies one whit, only the rhetoric used to support them. The data allow for only one conclusion, that modern regressive leftists are in one of two categories, those who are horribly racist and those who are so ignorant of economics and history as to not see the racism at all. There's a good way to tell who is likely in the former category. Who are the ones who are desperately trying to paint libertarians as racist, even though their progressive forebears said over and over again that laissez-faire capitalism would equalize the races and it was bad for that reason? The accusation of racism is flung around with such desperation that it can only be a frenzied attempt to deflect from their own failings. Really, if the leftists were projecting any harder, they'd summon Batman.